Hello, welcome to the Más Secrets podcast. My name is Fiorella. I'm a survivor of CSA, and this space was created to break generational silence, normalize hard conversations, and remind survivors that they're not alone. Before we start today's episode, I do want to give a trigger warning. We will be discussing CSA, grooming, manipulation, and trauma-related experiences. Please take care of your heart and your nervous system. If you need to pause, skip this episode, or come back later, that is completely okay. Your safety comes first. I also want to say this. Everything shared on this podcast reflects personal experiences, perspectives, and alleged events. Nothing discussed here is intended to state verified facts about any individual. This podcast is for awareness, education, and survivor storytelling purposes only. I am not a psychologist, therapist, or medical professional. I am simply a survivor using my voice. This is not therapy, legal advice, or medical advice. It's a conversation meant to reduce stigma and bring darkness into the light. If you are in crisis or need professional help, please reach out to a licensed provider or local authorities in your area. With that being said, let's begin. Welcome to another episode of the Más Secrets podcast. We have a very special guest, Maria Santiago. She's a clinical social worker and a therapist who works closely with survivors of sexual abuse, especially in the Latin community. Her work goes beyond the clinical. She understands the cultural layers, the silence, the shame, and the secrets that so many survivors carry. In this episode, we talk about healing, breaking cycles, and what it really means to start naming what has been kept hidden for so long. If you ever felt like your story didn't have a space, this episode is for you. Welcome, Maria, to the podcast.
Hey, hola. How's everybody?
Hello. Can you share a bit about your background and what led you to work in clinical social work and therapy with survivors of CSA?
I've been a clinical social worker for 23 years. It's going to be 24 in April next month. I became a clinical social worker specifically to work with children. My age range is young folks from the age of 12 to 25. That's the population that I see. I am not only a licensed clinical social worker, but I am a PEL, which is a person who works in the education system as well. I'm licensed to work in the education system. So I became interested in sexual assault sort of by default. I graduated from grad school back in 2004. First job was out of my grad school experience was at a place called Mutual Ground in Aurora, Illinois. Mutual Ground is a place where it's a shelter for victims of domestic violence, which I had done some work with victims of domestic violence in the Latino community before my master's degree. So I said, I'm going to go work somewhere where I'm familiar with the kind of work. But I also knew that they had a department that worked in sexual abuse in the Kane County or Aurora, Illinois area. If you know anything about the Chicagoland area, you know that Aurora has a very large Latino, specifically Mexican and Puerto Rican community. So I decided to go work there and train there. So I always say, even 23 years later, that Mutual Ground showed me how to be a therapist. They taught me how to be a therapist, but specifically taught me how to be a sexual abuse expert and specialist in that world. So I trained, I had an initial 40-hour training. It was a week-long training on different modalities of doing therapeutics for clients who have experienced sexual abuse. And then specifically with clients who are Latino who have experienced sexual abuse. And I was there for about 3 years, which were really instrumental in my growth as a therapist. But I learned as a new clinician, I learned a lot about how the Latino community looks at sexual abuse and interacts with sexual abuse and sexual assault of all kinds, and how treatment or the best treatment modalities is accepted or not in the Latino community.
Oh, okay. You have a lot of experience. That's amazing. From your experience, what are some challenges Latino families face when dealing with CSA?
There's a lot of challenges. There's what I call internal familiar challenges, and then there's external systematic challenges. So the internal familiar challenges are, when do we tell? ¿A qué horas decimos? Right? A lot of the times, children come from communities or come from families where, unfortunately, there's a lot of dysfunction. I mentioned domestic violence, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason why those two were tied together. Historically, in community mental health, domestic violence and sexual abuse of children are usually tied together, right? And with domestic violence, there's also a lot of other things that come along, like substance abuse, poverty, sometimes the inability to say something because somebody in our family is undocumented. We come from a mixed documentation family.
That's
So
right.
if these kids know this, these kids are in the background, adults or young adults or teenagers, they know this. They're in the background, they're hearing that, uncle or stepfather or dad or whoever is undocumented. So if they get in trouble with the police, they're going to get deported,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of that systemic familial pieces that are sort of like puzzle pieces. So even just getting to say to somebody, right,
Mhm.
I've been sexually abused, right? Even the language. I'm a big proponent for having lots of communication throughout a child's childhood about sexual
Mm-hmm.
abuse. It's not just one big um, conversation, it's
Mm-hmm.
many conversations, right? About
Mm-hmm.
like what is sexual abuse, or let's name things by their real names, right?
Yes. To
Because
start.
to start, cuando están chiquitos, when they're little,
Mm-hmm.
right? I use
Mm-hmm.
myself as an example a lot. I have two sons, they're adults now, but I have two sons. And when they were little, we talked about the names of things,
Yeah,
right? And then,
absolutely.
yeah.
And not bring
So
any shame around it either. Because there's another thing like, oh, don't talk about their real names because there's so much shame around just the private parts. And some parents are even scared of naming the right names to it. And they make up nicknames, and just having the right language can make such a big difference.
definitely, because then that brings to the systemic piece. Like if a child does tell and then they go to an emergency room or they go to the police
Hmm.
and they're talking about their bodies in this nickname, it's not that
Hmm.
the police or the emergency room staff or a doctor or pediatrician is not going to get it. But in terms of legal proceedings, it's so much more important that the kids name the things the correct name. So, for
Hmm.
instance, like we don't say things like with my children and with my nieces and nephews and people like that in my own life, I I say the right names. We don't say que el pajarito, que el
Hmm.
ojito, que, all these
See.
different things, right? That it's cute. And as parents, we feel like, se oye feo decir que se llama un pene, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Or que se llama una vagina. Se oye feo. But we
Hmm.
have to say it, right? And they could sometimes say, like, okay, man,
Yeah.
that's a cutesy way to say it, but the real name, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of power in naming things. Then when kids get a little older, there's more information that it's given that's age appropriate, like, you know, what's a good touch, what's a not so good touch, what's a bad touch,
Hmm.
who can touch you.
Yeah.
Also, what you can see. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, I'm very big an advocate as well about consent, number one. And I'm sure you know more about this and you can elaborate, but with little things, you know how at family gatherings they're always like, vaya dele el beso a su tía, a su tío, a su abuela, aunque the kid doesn't even want to go and give out kisses to everyone. And that's just so normalized in our community as well. It started with that little things, like it's not a big deal to give a hug, but to put your child in an uncomfortable situation where they don't even want to get like touchy. I think it starts with those little things. I don't know if you can elaborate more about that because that's one thing about the community that they're
Mm,
so about being so touchy. And I know that's how the Latin community is, but
mhm,
I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, especially because sometimes, even with my family, I tell them about my own daughter. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and sometimes she doesn't want to give out hugs to everyone. And some of my family will get super mad about that. And I'm like, no, you have to understand they're children. That's how they start
mm.
learning.
So I have a niece who has two young daughters, and I learned so much from her because I think definitely it's an evolving thing in the Latino community about like children saludar, right? We when we see each other, saludamos con beso, right? We come
Mm-hmm.
and hug and give a kiss and whatnot. And I think that's like the whole Latino community. My husband's Puerto Rican, they
Yeah.
do it in their community. I'm Mexican, we
Yeah.
do it in our community. So I think it's a thing. But I learned from my niece, for instance, that like babies, right? If you go and don't kiss the baby, don't
Yeah.
because you can spread germs and the herpes complex that you might have on your lips or whatever, you can spread that to the kid, to the
Yeah.
babies.
That too.
And
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have that autonomy yet to say, yes, I want to be kissed or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we're doing with the littles and our family is because we know that there's people my age and older, who are like, ay, that niño es un malcriado, like he didn't no
See, yes.
saludó, he
Mm-hmm.
didn't or whatever. So we do talk to people in our families and we tell them two things, right? Like they have autonomy, tienen autonomía sobre su cuerpo, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
little kids. Some of them have sensory issues, but all of them should have autonomy because that's a protective factor over sexual abuse to have autonomy over bodies. They can say no to any kind of touch. So that's number one. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, right? So it there's a value. We don't want to take away that value of closeness of intercambio de cultura with our own
Mm-hmm.
kids. So one of the things that we do with the kids is like if you don't want to touch or hug tia or tío or your little cousin or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you can do this, right?
Yeah,
Shake
you
your hand.
can wave.
You can do this. We do a lot of this,
Mm-hmm.
like from far away. Or you can say, I don't feel like a hug today, but I'm glad to see you. No, well, no quiero abrazo y beso, pero qué bueno que estás aquí,
Mm-hmm. I
right?
love that. Mm-hmm.
So
Giving options.
there's giving option. Oh, and
Yeah,
so it's okay. You can say, oh, hoy no quiero abrazo. It's okay. And
I
really,
love that.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
As adults, we are the ones who should um, really prioritize the well-being of that child. So it's our responsibility, not the child's responsibility. It's our responsibility to be okay with it.
Mm-hmm. I love that what you just said because the adults have that responsibility as well of managing their feelings. How are you going to be heard throwing a tantrum because a child didn't want to say hi to you? That's another perspective as well. You are modeling. How are you supposed to expect a child to take control of their emotions if we as an adults are not modeling that to them as well? I've seen it in my own family. Tia's getting mad because my daughter didn't want to say hi, which I love the options that you said as well. I tell my daughter, you don't want to give a hug, but you can still wave, you can do knuckles, you can just say hi. It's not all about just being touchy. There's other ways to say hello as well. So I love that you mentioned that. How does
Mm.
culture impact a survivor's ability to speak up or seek help?
It impacts it in so many ways, right? Because culturally, you mentioned earlier, right? We are a very Christian Catholic community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sex and sexuality is something that we don't talk about in our culture, right? We don't talk about it freely. It's not something that we explore in conversations. So if we don't explore that, we definitely don't explore when our sex and sexuality is abused, right? And so when kids come out, they usually come out to teachers who are not in their culture because they understand that they see things differently. When adults tell about their abuse, they usually tell medical staff, they usually tell police officers, but they very rarely tell the first person that they tell is somebody within their community or somebody within their family. Um,
Interesting. I did not know that.
it is very there's a couple of studies. I'm also in a PhD program in community psychology, and I'm studying Latinos and mental health, and
Okay.
the distrust of Latinos to the mental health system
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And so I'm learning a lot about who they talk about their mental health to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of studies out there that show that Latinos and African Americans speak to people outside of their culture first about assaults, addictions, and any mental health issues that they might have. And that's because we don't understand it, right? We don't understand it. We don't talk about it within our culture. So even if they do come out to an outside system like a hospital, the medical system, the law enforcement system, the mental health system, it's very rare that they find somebody who speaks their language.
Yeah,
So
that's another barrier.
there's another barrier,
Mhm.
especially if they're coming out during both Trump administrations. The level of engagement in mental health services has decreased in the Latino community because of folks having mixed documentation statuses in their families. So they're not coming out, they're being sexually assaulted, even children, because what if, you know, the cops come to my house, the police come to my house, and mi tío is undocumented and he's going to be taken away, right? Or my
Mm-hmm.
mom had nothing to do with it. She's undocumented and they might come take
Yeah.
her away.
Yeah, I did not think about that too, how that can impact so many, especially children in the Latin community. And that really hurts my heart. I don't have any other words because having that trauma on top of having to worry about one of your family being undocumented and not getting the help that you need because you have that fear, even though, like how you said, it might be your mom that has nothing to do with it. And you're just scared that she might get in trouble because you're asking for help. That's something I did not contemplate as well, and how the Trump administration has so much influence on it too. What should parents, caregivers, or educators watch for it if they suspect a child might be experiencing abuse?
So it's change in the personality and behavior of the child. And it's not always negative change. So, stereotypically in the mental health community and even in the education community, we think of a kid who's been sexually assaulted, who is withdrawn, they don't want to talk, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's elation and being too social, too wanting to be with everybody, maybe too flirty, right? Even if they're little kids, right? They're a little
Mhm.
too flirty, they're a little too touchy, they're a little too wanting to be in spaces like personal spaces, that kind of thing. Whatever is a change, right? If this is a little girl like me when I was little, yo era traviesa, it was always all over the place, right? If all of a sudden I'm withdrawn and shy and don't want nobody to touch me, that okay, I get it. But what if I'm already kind of like a bookworm? I have a sister that she's like that. She's always been a bookworm, right? And all of a sudden she's in your business. She's all like wants to be everybody's friend. That's a change. Clothing in adolescence and pre-adolescence is something that we look at, either provocative clothing, right? Like showing a lot of skin, that kind of thing. Or all of a sudden the big black hoodie, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
big black hoodie. The other one is bathing. Bathing too much or too little, right? There's a big change. A lot of the times it's too little, right? They don't want to bathe.
Mhm.
They don't want to bathe because it's a protective barrier. If they smell, maybe the person will not abuse them, so there's that, right?
In my case, now that you just mentioned that about dating, for me, it's just that I did not want to be naked. I remember I did not want to shower. I wanted to be covered the whole time. Just getting in the shower, that was a big struggle for me. And I haven't seen that mentioned as much, like how you said about trying to repel the abuser in that way. That's what I haven't heard. I've heard like the part about not being naked because I just
Mhm.
don't feel comfortable like how I did. But what you said, then trying to repel the abuser by the smell, I've never heard that one before. But you can continue.
The other thing is gaining a lot of weight is very common. Also, probably the same, like if si estoy gordita or I'm not attractive, si me despeino, si if I don't take care of my hygiene, that person's not going to find me attractive, or they think that the person's not going to find them attractive. The sexualization of children is also what also can lead to the opposite, where they're looking at themselves as a sexual being at an age where it's too young. The other one, specifically for younger children, is something called urenesis or bedwetting, right? So,
Mhm.
bedwetting probably, urenesis is a physiological and a psychological issue, right? So, some kids have it because their little bladder no creció and they don't have the hormone to hold the bladder at night. And they just, they pee the bed. And sometimes there's no psychological reason. It's a physiological thing. They stop when they're like about 8, 9, 10 years old. But if this child has never wet the bed or has been potty trained for a long, long time and they start wetting the bed, it's
Mm.
usually not urenesis where their bladder hasn't grown. It's usually a UTI, a urinary tract infection, or a yeast infection in girls. And boys can get UTIs as well. So a lot of the times when they're being touched or they're being penetrated, there's sometimes infections.
Yeah.
And a child with a lot of infections, a lot of UTIs or yeast infections, is a big sign. Um, Also, children who are also touching themselves, right? And their sexual organs, if they're touching themselves a lot of the times, they don't know to wash their hands. And they usually are touching themselves because they've been sexualized. A
Mm.
good predator, and I hate to say it that way, but a good predator is not going to hurt you, right? They're not going to hurt you physically. A good predator is going to make it feel good.
Mhm.
And so, it's not your fault. So, anybody who's hearing this, it's not your fault that it felt good. Okay. Because it's a
It's normal.
physiological response. That's normal.
Mhm.
And, that happened. And then, you're a little kid, you're in kindergarten,
You don't
right? You don't know
know.
how many times when I was a school social worker, I was called to a kindergarten when they were taking a nap because a little boy, a little girl was touching themselves, right?
Yeah.
Well, why do they touch themselves? Well, sometimes it's natural. I don't know if you have a little girl. I have little
Yeah.
boys, when they were,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they won't appreciate me saying this, but when they were little, when
Yeah.
you took off the diaper, I van y agarra, right? That's
Mhm. Yeah.
normal.
That's normal.
That's normal.
Mhm.
My husband would say, es que sintieron el aire.
Yeah, I've heard that
El
one.
viejito le dio, and ahí van, right?
Yeah.
But that's normal. But if they're consistently doing it, and even if you tell them you don't do that in public, wash your hands, and you give them direction in that way, if they're continuing to do it, it's because they've been sexualized,
Mm.
right? And sexualization is being introduced to sexual things that feel good, and now you want to continue to do them. And that introduction is also viewing pornography, so there's that part of it. If now they're 10 and you see that they're viewing pornography, someone taught them how to do that. And,
Okay.
and that's a grooming piece, by the way, is,
Interesting. So a
yeah,
9-year-old by themselves, let's say a child, is not gonna go in the internet and go look for that. Like they wouldn't
no.
have that in their mind. That's not normal.
So again, I use myself as a lot of examples. I remember telling my 10-year-old at the time, like doing the internet talk,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
there's safety of the internet and all that kind of wonderful things. And I remember telling him, like, sometimes you will click on something and there's a naked lady or something, or
Mm,
naked man.
mhm.
And he said, Mom, there's naked ladies on the internet. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I tell him?
Oh.
And he's like, oh my God, like, and not that he's like the epitome of being normal or anything like that, but
Mhm.
most kids when they're that age, they're taken aback, right? Like, wait, there's
Mhm.
naked people. Like most
That's
kids,
right. Yeah, they'd
yeah,
be shocked.
they get shocked. They're like, oh my God, mom. Sometimes I'm like, don't go looking for them, but
Mhm.
because that part is normal that they go looking for, but that they know for sure somebody
Mhm.
taught, right? They taught
Especially if
them.
it's compulsively doing it, like that's okay.
It
Because I've
compo-
seen cases like that, and it's really hard because most parents, I'm not to that point yet. My daughter is only 5 years old, but I've heard this conversation in parents, especially with the internet, where what is normal and what is not. What is normal for a child to be looking up on the internet because they're curious, and what is not because they've been through trauma. So there's
Mhm.
like a really I don't know if it's like a blurred line, but is there's just not enough information for parents to know what signs to look for because sometimes they're like how you said, they might be very social, not the normal signs, and they might just be doing that, looking up pornography compulsively. I've seen this a lot, sadly. So I don't know if it's the internet or what it is. How can you tell parents what is normal and what is not?
So normality of like watching pornography, it normally starts to happen right in the tween ages, like, 11, 12, 13. Like folks, young kids will start like looking at it. I've had a lot of clients of my own who have not been sexually abused, who have stumbled upon it or who went and looked at it, well,
Yeah.
especially middle school, middle
Mhm.
school, right?
Yeah.
So they'll say it, and you should have a conversation with your children, and both boys and girls, by the way.
Mhm.
A lot of times we focus on boys when it comes to this, but
Yeah.
both boys and girls, right? We have a conversation about this, pretty normative. When it's not normative is when they continue to do it like almost, there's a lot of neurotransmitters that are released when you watch pornography. So it can become compulsive,
Mhm.
right? But when they're younger than the age of puberty or the onset of puberty and they're watching this kind of thing, right? A lot of the times usually when this happened as a clinician and as a parent, I will say, where did you, what was the first time you saw this? Who showed you?
Mm.
Right?
Okay.
And, ¿cuántos años tenías cuando la primera vez que lo dices? Where were you?
Mhm. Find
Right?
the root of it. Mhm.
Where were you? Who showed you? Oh, pues mi primo. ¿Cuál primo? Oh, mi primo so and so. Oye, tú me dijiste que ese primo tenía 18 años, tenía
Mhm.
15 años. Or yo lo vi, mi tío allá abajo. One day I was running around and he had it on a TV. And
Mhm.
then I'm like, the accidental watching of porn is never accidental,
No.
right? So we talk about like, did you watch it again? And then what happened after that? Because you can really, the use of porn is a grooming process, because if you don't tell about that, what else are you not going to tell about, right? Si tú vistes accidentalmente que tío estaba watching porn, right?
Mhm.
And you didn't tell your parents, then what are you going to do next? Right? What
Mhm.
am I going
Yeah.
to say next? Oh, come
Mhm.
watch. You're going to see this. You're going to get sexually, excited. I'm going to abuse you.
Mhm. I just did an interview this last episode where she was describing how for her it was through comics. It was Batman and Robin naked. And then it escalated to porn. So that's usually how it goes, the grooming. And a lot of parents don't know that either, that it's not going to be this hurtful thing. It's not going to be something because a lot of people say, like, how did you not say anything? Why didn't you speak up? There's so much confusion in the child's mind where they don't know what is good and what is not because that's how it starts with the grooming, with, oh, come look at this, trying to normalize it as well. So,
Yeah.
what you said about the porn, absolutely. And people don't realize that a lot of the essay starts with little things like that.
Essay
Yeah.
starts again, a good perpetrator of sexual assault is not going to hurt you physically. It's not going to hurt, right? It does
Hmm.
sometimes, but a lot of the times it comes with something else that's pleasurable. Like if you sit over here next to me
Mhm.
and you let me touch your arm or you let me touch your muslo, if you let me, te voy
Mhm.
a llevar
Yeah.
a Burger King, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna take, next time I go to the flea market, te voy a traer chamoy, or
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
it with, or cositas así. And then it gradually escalates, right?
I
It
just
be-
did a video not too long ago explaining how one of my primas, how the way that she was abused, it was in front of everyone. It was at a family gathering. We were having a bonfire. She was sitting on my tío's lap, and he put his jacket over her, and he was touching her inappropriately in front of everyone. A lot of the comments that I got was, why didn't she scream? Why didn't she cry? How did no, like these little things, always, always, always questioning the survivor, which is something that we have to change. But it just goes to show that abuse doesn't have to be hurtful. It can be happening in front of everyone and nobody will be noticing because, how you said, it just feels good. How can the community better support survivors and their families?
by listening, by believing,
Mm-hmm.
by understanding, and by preventing, right? So prevention, like what you just said, it's not normal to have
Mm-hmm.
a little girl on your lap.
No,
If you're a man, it's not normal to have a little girl on your lap and then put a cover over them. Porque eso pasa all the time,
no.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In the back seat of cars, when all the kids are asleep, porque la rumba downstairs and all the kids are asleep in the back room, and entra el tío y agarra a la gente, right?
Sí,
That's not normal, right? It's not normal to single out one child, right? It's not normal to,
absolutely.
if one of my sons or my husband went to single out one of my nieces and nephews and said, "This is now my special little friend.
Oh,
Este es el que siempre, voy a estar con este niño o con esta niña."
mhm.
Like, that's not normal. Like,
No.
you bring my nieces and nephews over and they come in a bunch. I love them as
Mhm.
much as everybody, right? And when, for instance, when they come home, I tengo una sobrinita, little Sofía. Ella se me avienta, se me
Mhm.
avienta. Like, she's just like, and that kind of thing.
Oh.
And I always tell her, is it okay? Right?
Mhm.
Is it okay? Are you okay with this? Right? And she
Mhm.
comes on my lap. Let me tell you, I never put a cover and I love her and I'm a woman, right? I don't ever
Yeah.
put on top of her and let's snuggle. No, 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 no,
No,
no.
that's not normal.
That's not normal.
Mm-mm.
Y menos, they treat my husband as a jungle gym, right? They
Mhm.
se suben arriba de él, flip me over, tío, and that kind of thing. And he makes sure to do it in the living room where everybody's watching. And
Yes.
he'll say things like, "Here are my hands, okay?"
Mhm.
He'll say that to them, like, "Here are my hands. What do you want me to do with my hands?"
Mhm. Mhm.
Like,
I
"Oh, pero
love
quiero."
that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, just
I
saying,
just
like,
want
I
to
mean, mis nos quieren que lo avienten para arriba, that's what they want,
see.
right? And so
Mhm.
nothing like other than that happens, and we have to make sure that that's the case.
No, I just wanted to mention that you said the jungle gym. Another thing that I've noticed, I've seen it a lot, at least where I'm from. I'm from Costa Rica, with cosquillas. They love to do cosquillas to los niños siempre, que las cosquillas, que esto, lo otro. That can escalate as well with, oh, it tickles here, it tickles there, and then it moves to other body parts. I always say, like, I do not like tickles so much, especially because I went through that as well. It starts with, oh, the tickle here, the tickle that. Someone being too handsy with your children, that's not, that's a red flag. Mm-mm, that's
Yeah,
not normal
yeah, and
whatsoever.
like, you tell the kid, like, te voy a hacer cosquillas, and if they say
Mm,
no, then
yeah.
again, it's the same thing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm,
no, we don't want to take away all, like, affection, right?
mm-hmm,
Because that's a good thing. But we do want to make sure that our children know what affection is coming, right?
mm-hmm,
That's prevention, knowing what affection is coming, and then they decide yes or no. right?
Okay.
And then the third thing is you're the adult. And even if the child decides yes or no, and you think this is weird,
Mhm.
or this could be misconstrued, then it's up to you to say, no, mijo, you know what? Mejor, I'm not going to flip you in the pool, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe ya estás grandecita, mija, like now you're 10, you're not 5.
Yeah.
Now you're, 11. I'm not going to flip you in the pool. I'm not going to help you with your bathing suit, or you can't come over, sleep over in our room today. Ya estás grande,
Mhm.
mija. That needs to be downstairs. Like, mira, you can't see it, but in the other room, I have like a pull-out couch because I have a lot of sobrinas and sobrinos.
Mhm.
Like, they can stay there, right? Like, ya están
Mhm.
grandecitos. Nobody's under, well, I have a 1-year-old, but nobody,
Yeah.
he's not coming to stay with me anytime soon. But you know what I'm saying? Like, those are the
Yeah.
situations. You have to have that. Like, you're a responsible adult. And if you have a relative, un conocido, un pariente que no hace eso para tus hijos, that's a red flag.
Absolutely.
That's,
No respecting boundaries.
yeah, thing
Yeah.
way also preventative. There's a thing in the Latino community and in the American community about el tío that everybody knows o el primo que everybody knows que toca a los niños.
Mhm.
Okay,
I can
we need,
relate.
yeah, everybody knows. Oh, ese, no te vayas allá con el tío este porque the uncle, he can't see you in a skirt because he's
Mhm.
going to try to touch your legs, or
Mhm.
he's going to try to put his hand up your skirt, or
Mhm.
don't go in his room. He's going to tell you to go in his room, but don't go, right? Or, in my family, there's one, that we definitely, I've called DCFS on him many times. So if you know who you are, you know who you are, you know,
Yeah.
but it's like, to me, then preventative is that my children do not go to any event that they're in. If I've already
Absolutely. I
called,
agree.
my kids are not going. And that's not your uncle no more. That's not your cousin anymore. That's
Mm.
no one. Because if I haven't called out the abuse of other people, then I'm not going to serve my children in a silver platter,
No, and they
right?
will find ways, even though they might say, "Oh no, I'm watching my children all the time. I know that Theo is there, but I'm always like keeping an eye on my children." They'll always find a way to do it, especially if they've never gotten in trouble. I've seen it so many times, and it's really sad. The Latin community and, like how you said, the African American community, they see this kind of behavior as well, where they're always protecting the abuser because I don't know if it's like too shameful to talk about it. What do you think is behind that situation? Why can we just call it out and just cut ties with these type of people? What do you think it's the reason? Because I just cannot understand.
It's a phenomena, psychological phenomena that happens in the Latino community specifically. It also happens in the Middle Eastern communities, but in the Latino community specifically called familiarismo. It's family above everything. And it's a very traditional, very patriarchal way of looking at the world, right? And in our communities, it's family above everything. And it's emphasized in the United States when people immigrate, because these are the first people that we have contact with when people immigrate to this country. It's other family members. There's something called chain migration where people come cadenita, right? Like
Mhm.
it, no, and so yo vengo, right? So family is everything. You don't have anyone, you don't have, in our countries of origin, we have la señora on the street, in la iglesia, lo que sea, right? We have other community. But when we immigrate to the US, we only have them. So we protect them, right? We protect them no
Above
matter what,
everything.
above everything.
Mm.
Emphasize, it starts in our countries of origin. But here in the US, it has emphasized so much that, if you put them away, vas a ser un ingrato. You're gonna mess up the whole family, porque tu abuelo era el que estaba arreglándole a todos los
Mhm.
documentos, right? And now he's in jail. Now we all can't go, we all
Yeah.
can't be presidents, right? Or,
Yeah.
yeah, so we protect the family more than anything. There's also something called Marianismo, which is the mother of the household, right? Or the grandmother of the household. She wants to protect everybody. Está nervioso y por eso tienta a los niños. Por eso
Mm-hmm.
anda a las personas,
I know. There's no
and
excuse.
there's no excuse. Those are
Mm-hmm.
the reasons, by the way, they're not excuses.
No.
So whoever's listening to this is not an excuse.
No,
It
not what I was just really curious to see what is the thing behind, because I've seen it in my own family as well. Now that I'm speaking out, and just I decided to press charges and all of these, a lot of my family, they're like, how could you? And they cut ties with me before they cut ties with the abuser, which is mind blowing. Especially, I'm glad that it is changing with the new generations, though, now that there's more access to information and everything, that it's something that is slowly changing. I feel like this is more prevalent in the older generations. I don't know if it's more prevalent in the older generations and it's something that it changing at all, or how do you think from your experience?
well, there's some great news around
Mm-hmm.
that, even in our countries of origin. I'm seeing a lot of younger immigrants, like first gen, like they're the ones who immigrate here to the US, who are Gen Z
Mm-hmm.
and millennials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'm so impressed with a lot of the Latin American education system that are bringing social emotional learning to the classrooms. So for the first time, I know I'm a Gen Xer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know that cuando yo iba a Mexico, I was born here in the US, but when I used to go to Mexico, like I would ask people, like, "Oh, do you know what self-esteem is?" And they were like, "¿Qué es eso?" You know, like, my generation, they're like, "What? You just grin and
Yeah.
bear it. Like, what are you talking about?" That kind of thing. But I definitely started seeing it with millennials. They're changing. Esa generación está cambiando, and they're getting information, not just from the internet, but they're getting information at their churches. They're getting information at their schools. I have cousins in Mexico who are in the education system, and they're always talking to me about, like, mira esto, we did this
Yeah.
new social emotional learning on sexual abuse, depression, anxiety, on interfamiliar domestic violence. So when they're coming and they're immigrating to the US, if they've been to primaria, secundaria, prepa, all these different ways of educating themselves, they've already come with the language, right? The language in Spanish, but the language,
Yeah.
right? So they already know, like, they'll come in to therapeutics and they'll say things like, este, tengo el autoestima baja, a mí me abusaron a esta edad, esto es lo que me pasó, like all this very good language. And they'll even call people narcissists.
Yeah.
At least we're having some connections with mental health and how it affects your life.
Mhm.
So we get a lot of that, especially Gen Z. Gen Z comes with some great language, with some great understanding of who they are and how they interact with mental health, but also with sexual abuse.
Oh, that's great news. I'm glad that it's changing. I've always been a huge mental health advocate. I always say mental health is as important, if not more, than physical health. Like we do, like the physical checkups at the doctor and this and that. But I'm glad that it's starting to switch. Like, hey, seeing a therapist is as good too, and it's not something that you're going to get criticized and all of this and all of that, because there's another taboo as well in our family from our abuelas, like, oh, what are you going to go and do to see a therapist? Like, you're okay, depression doesn't exist. You're sad, ponte a limpiar, like that kind of rhetoric, which is
Yeah,
it's pretty common, but I'm glad it is changing. So that is such great news. What
yeah,
is
no,
Go ahead, go ahead.
definitely. I was gonna just say, definitely, I am gonna be starting working with older clients in the very near
Oh,
future, and around sexual abuse. My oldest client that I've had, it was in her 80s, who had been sexually abused as a young girl. And so there is this whole slew of people who are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old that never got to tell their story. Our abuelas were, se la robaron del rancho somewhere. and
So,
they had 8 kids with a man that didn't love them, and when you
mhm,
tell them that's sexual abuse or they were sexually
yeah.
abused within their marriage, they
Mhm,
they're like, "Oh," sometimes they're taken aback. I get
mhm,
men, who might immigrated to the US maybe in the 80s and 90s, and another part of immigration stories is what happens when men live together in an apartment, 10 men living together in an apartment. There's a lot of sexual assault. There's a lot of sexual assault that men don't talk about. Yeah.
no, they don't talk about it at all. If it's already hard for women to speak out, there's a lot of judgment from male survivors, or they're just afraid from how society might perceive them to, speak out about these issues. I'm so glad that it's changing, but I've seen a lot of male survivors that they just decide not to acknowledge it whatsoever because the shame around it is so big, so, so big. What strategies or therapeutic approaches have you found most effective in helping survivors heal?
So actually, that is part of my research right now, is actually coming up with a modality, a way of doing therapy for Latinos specifically in mental health, but also with sexual abuse. So, what the research shows and what I've seen that works is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's fancy words for
Mm.
if you know better, you do better. Another modality that works really well with clients, in my opinion, is narrative therapy. Narrative therapy helps us tell our story, but it helps us rewrite how we feel about it. So it's a very interesting way of doing therapeutics. It's very Latino because we like to tell stories, right? We
Yeah,
like to
true.
like esto lo que pasó and then this and that. Let me tell you,
Mm-hmm.
there's that part of it. Then there's another kind of therapeutics that is maybe a little experimental, but I've had a lot of success, especially with trauma, and that's EMDR. So EMDR is an eye movement therapeutics. I'm not certified, but I am trained in EMDR. And what that means is that it's a specific kind of therapy that works with your neurological system through eye movement, and it moves the part of trauma that's happening now to the part of the brain that's already processed it. So it's pretty interesting because it helps us really kind of, not that we forget about it, but it is not as tangible and as imminent and as dangerous as on a regular basis. So it helps
Mm-hmm.
with a lot with post-traumatic stress disorder. There's another kind that's kind of derived from EMDR that's art therapy. It's ART. I don't know what it stands for specifically, but it's also very new. Going to a training in June in regards to it. I haven't tried it myself as a therapist. I have had it done on me recently, and it was pretty inspirational. So I'm like, let me sign up to learn more about it.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's pretty
Is it
interesting. Go ahead.
is it like more to for the trauma that's stored in your body kind of therapy, or how does it work? Like you said that it's pretty new.
So it it's in the school of somatic therapy. Somatic means things that are stored in your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a long time ago, there was a couple of studies that showed that what we call the body keeps the score. There's a whole book, right? So our body keeps trauma, right? Our cells keep trauma. There's a whole cortisone inflammation that happens in our bodies that then can start other physical health issues like diabetes, high blood pressure, all sorts of different things, right? And then there is these therapeutics, right? The modalities, a way of doing therapy that help calm that down, right? So art and EMDR help your brain reestablish how we think about trauma, how you think about your own specific trauma, right? So it helps us kind of make it go from a place that is happening now, which like the post-traumatic stress disorder. like when you have a trigger and it's happening now and you go back to the abuse, right? So these kinds of therapies help you, your brain, put it from that is happening now to already happened. I'm safe right now. I will always have a reaction to this, but it doesn't have to make my cortisol go up.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to make me anxious. Doesn't have to make me depressed. I've dealt with it. I'm dealing with it and go on.
I love that because I feel like most of the CSA trauma it's stored in the body because you can just it's just there since you're a child you don't really know how to process what you went through a lot of like in my case I blocked a lot of the trauma which I know there's a lot of conversation around it if it's that you block the trauma or if it's that you're just deliberately not trying to remember like there's a lot of discussion around that like some people think that you just decide not to remember and all of these things which is really hard to heal from something that you don't even have the words to or you don't have the memory. So I feel like that kind of therapy is so necessary to be able to move forward because I can totally attest to that. I have so many stomach problems that's really prevalent that I've always had since I was little. And I didn't really know why. Like my mom even took me to the doctor to see what was wrong with me because my stomach was always hurting and obviously they didn't find anything and it's just this kind of trauma can show up in your body in so many ways that I do
Mhm.
feel like something along with the mind discussing it and everything but if it's not tied to that trauma that goes in your body it's really hard to move forward from it. I love that you mentioned that there's a new therapy that you're going to go and explore. That's great news because a lot of people don't feel like EMDR help them. Everyone is different, obviously. What worked for you might not work for me. So having so many options to look up on how can you heal, that's just great because like how I said, it's not one size fits all. This is so complex and it's so important to have so many tools. Are there unique barriers for male survivors in Latino communities? I know we talked a little bit about that, but I don't know if you can expand more on that.
Definitely, there's unique barriers. There's masculinity barriers, right? The idea in our community that we're a patriarchal community, right? We're usually it looks like we're led by men. It's usually women in the background
Yeah,
doing a lot of the
absolutely.
heavy lifting,
I agree.
but yeah, definitely. But
Mhm.
the masculinity and machismo in our community is very apparent, and it is also a barrier for these men to talk about their sexual abuse because you know their physical and sexual prowess, right? Their ability to work hard and have a lot of women or conquest is the ideal, right? So when somebody conquered you, entre comillas, right? It becomes something to be said about you in the community. I think it's also very rooted in the misunderstanding of what the LGBTQIA community is, right? So a lot of the times, if you're sexually assaulted, if you're a man and you're sexually assaulted, people right away think that you're gay, right? In our community, they think, oh, you're gay, or you could become gay, or this is why you were gay, right? Because you were sexually assaulted cuando eras niño, and that's why you're gay. You're not really
Mhm.
gay. This is why you're gay, right?
Yeah.
So there's this whole tie to your masculinity, and the ways that it happens is also very instrumental in why they don't tell. So, the studies that I've read and in my experience, men are sexually assaulted when they're young, when they're very, very little. And it's usually by very known pedophiles, right? Pedophiles in their family and community, at church, at, you know, coaches, they're usually assaulted in that way. The other times that they're assaulted in the Latino community is if they go to prison. So there is a huge number of men who come out of prison who are sexually assaulted. And there's a lot of Latinos that come out of prison and detention centers, which are, they didn't commit a crime. They were just at the detention center and they're sexually assaulted. I'm seeing that a lot in my practice. The other one is what I mentioned earlier, these little pods of men that come together, maybe from their same community. Like their same community in Honduras. They all came together. De la aldea allá en Honduras, en Guatemala, todos se vienen, right,
Mhm.
together. And they're so close-knit. They all live in the same apartment. A veces son 10, 15 muchachos viviendo solos en an apartment here in the US. And they're lonely and they start sexually assaulting each other. And that's something else that I see. And then so how are you gonna tell on your pana, right? How are you gonna tell on your amigo, on your compa?
Or even
You
telling
know,
the authorities, like having as a man coming out and try to press charges in a way, like that's just many days it's easier to just stay quiet instead of going through all of that.
one of the things that I've seen a lot is when men do drugs or drink together, it's when the sexual assault happens. And then people feel some sort of way about talking about, like, I did a lot of cocaine and I didn't know what was going on. And I think I was sexually assaulted, right? Or I got
Mhm.
really drunk and I woke up con aquí, y aquí estaba mi compa al lado mío, right? So it
Yeah.
becomes really hard for them to be able to say, I was sexually assaulted because I was inebriated. Or
How can they even tell their wives, something like that? I've heard so many stories of what you just said, like los compas se van a tomar, dejan a las esposas, se van a tomar, a hacer coca, esto y lo otro. Pasan cosas y nadie sabe, ni las esposas, ni nada, lo mantienen callado, everything's super quiet. And how can you even come up to the realization, even speaking it out loud? I don't feel like it's something that just the perception of how they're going to be seen. I feel like there's so much pressure on that way. I don't know if it's something that you've seen in your practice, like what takes for a male to actually get to the point to speak up.
I think that a lot of the times it's pervasive or a pattern of sexual abuse on one person that gets them. It's usually not the first time. By the time they speak up, it's usually not the first time that they've been a victim. So I've had clients who, and this has happened to them many times, and they'll come in and they'll say to me, like, Maria, like, was I sexually, like, they still don't believe it. They ask me, like, hey, what does it mean if I'm bleeding from my anus? What does it mean if I don't remember the whole night? What does it mean? Hay una foto que salió por ahí, or things like that, right? And then that's when they start to come. So it's exposure or prolonged pattern of abuse is when they start coming. Cuando ya ellos ya no pueden más, right?
Okay.
But it's usually not the first time. It's not the first
Mhm.
time when they tell me. And by the way, it's usually not um in they don't come to me because I'm their sexual assault therapist. Okay, so let me kind of explain. I've also worked in other parts of mental health. So I've worked in substance abuse. I used to run DUI programs, and
Okay.
I've worked in mental health mandated clients, and now they have to come to see a therapist, right? Or classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is when they start telling me stuff. A lot of these men, and by the way, a lot of my career I spent seeing men. So there was a big chunk of my career, a good 10, 15 years of my career, where most all my clients were men. Almost all my clients were Latino men. So I feel like I know a lot about Latino men.
You
And,
do.
and they were mostly mandated. O se iban a divorciar, and this is why they came. Or they got a DUI, 2, 3 DUIs later, this is why they came, right? And this is when they start telling me, when like, ¿por qué tú tomas tanto?
Sí.
Like, why are you drinking so much? Like, tú todos los fines de semana te la pasas en la cantina, you tomas todo tu cheque. And then they start telling me, Maria, it's because I got here when I was 16 y empecé a trabajar en un restaurante and everybody sexually assaulted me at that restaurant, right? Or vine aquí y me quedé con mis panas y todos ellos, they took turns with me because they couldn't afford a hooker. Y ellos eran más chiquito, era el más flaquito, era el más, and they got on me. me pasaban y luego me daban dinero. O, María, mira, yo cuando era niño, mi tío, mi papá, el vecino, alguien abusó de mí. And this is the way they did it. And yo uso marihuana para olvidar. Yo uso cocaína para olvidar. I
El
drink to,
alcohol.
yeah, I drink
Ujú.
to. So, so a lot of the times they don't come seeking, sexual abuse service help, right? They come in through other avenues, right? I beat my wife. I also used
There's
to see
another.
who battered, right?
Mhm.
Men who were involved in domestic violence courts. I beat my wife because, you know, I don't know what to do with my emotions. I'm very sad and angry because later on I find out they were sexually abused.
That was the root of it. That's very interesting that most cases they don't come for help because they went through sexual abuse. That's just like part of once you find out what was the reason that they might be drinking, they have like addictions or anger issues. That's when it comes to that point. And that's a point of view that I've never heard before. So that's really good that you shared that with everyone to listen because so many we've seen, like the male figure in the Latino community, like they just don't talk about their emotions. And to the point for them to seek for a therapist or something like that is when they're just to the border of, addiction and all of these other issues that we touch. So hopefully that's something that can change with education, and especially in men. And I feel like mothers of boys have that opportunity to change that and letting boys, that whole saying of boys will be boys and just excusing boys for this and for that. I'm seeing a lot of change of that. And hopefully, boys can cry too. Things like that, just can little things like that can make a huge change of how they perceive themselves in adulthood, instead of bottling up all of these emotions or finding coping mechanisms to deal with the trauma that it's very, very seen. How can survivors start to reclaim their voice and agency after experiencing CSA?
There's lots of ways. There is advocacy ways. There is coming to your own mental health journey, right? And there is aligning yourself with the voice of other people, right? So, first, advocacy ways. If you can align yourself with an organization that helps with sexual abuse or prevention, it gives you that voice to speak, right? Like how I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier that in Latin America now where they're having all this language, understanding what that language is and aligning yourself with an institution or a system that does that. Here in the state of Illinois, I'm in Illinois. The state of Illinois, every county has what is called an ICASA site, which is a site for just specifically for the processing of sexual assault. So they will help you with the legal parts, with the medical part, and with the mental health parts. And by help, I mean it's free.
Oh, that's
Okay.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, every county in the state of Illinois has a site. It's Mutual Ground where I used to work. In DuPage County, I used to also work over there at the YWCA in Addison, Illinois. In Chicago, the YWCA and Metropolitan Family Services in Cook County, they have, I think, 3 sites because it's a big county in Chicago. And every county, just look up ICASA if you're in the state of Illinois, and you can get free services. The state of Illinois pays for them. So
That's
mental
good.
health, physical health, all sorts of different like legal advocacy. Align yourself with institutions like that. The other thing is also taking care of your mental health. So now you found these institutions. Take care of your mental health, right? So that you can fight for
Yeah.
others, right? So the fight would be like helping people prevent sexual abuse, speak out, right? Even if it's in small ways, like posting things on your socials, going to benefits,
Mhm.
going to like churches or schools or places like that, de tu historia, if you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
because I know that there's a lot of folks that are not ready for that,
No.
but that's okay. That's all right. Getting yourself ready is a journey. And sometimes you'll never get there because, for people, I know people where it's like, can I get you to that place? And they're like, it's not me. I get, but there is something to be said about understanding you know, how you can do the things in your own community, right? Even if it's
Mm.
con tus sobrinas, con tus hijas, with your sisters, with your aunts, right? With your grandmother, right? With people in
Mm.
your family, like this, what happened to you cuando te robaron allá en el rancho, that was sexual abuse, grandma.
Yeah.
You, like, let's talk about that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many things that we can do to help that and help get along with finding your voice.
I love that. I feel like nowadays it's changing. The way that we see survivors is changing. It used to be like, don't want to talk about this because people might see me weird or that I'm, like defective in some way, especially for little girls that, like virginity is so high up and just all the conversation around that topic and you saying that you're abused and I'm not pure. I mean, pure, I feel like now with the internet and so many resources like you shared, that is changing. So just speaking with someone, I feel like even if it's a friend, that might make a difference.
Yeah, most
Yeah.
definitely speaking about your experience and being a place where people can speak to you about their experience is finding your voice.
Hmm.
Um, I definitely tell people educate yourself in the language. There's a lot of books out there about the language. I would start with The Body Keeps the Score. It's an
Okay.
old book, but it's a groundbreaking book. I want to say it was done in the 70s or 80s or something like that.
My
It's
goodness.
an older book,
Yeah.
but it gives you the language of what your body feels like when it goes through trauma. And I think it's been translated into like 5 different languages. So I'm sure there's a Spanish version out there
Hmm.
somewhere. But it helps us talk about like qué es lo que le pasa al cuerpo cuando tiene uno un trauma.
Hmm.
There's also something called the ACEs test. It's a free online test. You can take the test online for free. Son 10 preguntas. There is a version in Spanish.
Okay.
It's been going on for 20 years. A study on how trauma, adverse child events, that's what the ACE stands for, adverse child events affects your physical health.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of it. I'll have to look it up.
And so
Yeah.
go look at it. Have some resources there. I would also, whatever state you're listening in on, just look up if they're in your county, if there is a sexual assault unit or mental health services or things like that, that maybe they're free for you.
Oh, that's great information. Thank you so much for sharing. And I always end the podcast with the same question to all of my guests. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned in life that you would like to share with our listeners?
I thought about that.
Yeah.
I grew up if you're from the Chicagoland area, you know this. I grew up in Humboldt Park. It's a Puerto Rican community. And when I was a very little girl, I grew up in an apartment building and there was many floors. And the floor in the middle before our floor, there was a lot of domestic violence in that floor and a lot of sexual abuse going on. And I was a little girl and I remember looking through the rails of the staircase, like looking down. And one day I saw que llegaron 3 ladies. And I was like, who are these ladies? They look like teachers to me. And later I found out they were social workers. And they changed the life of those kids and that mother that was down there. They changed their lives. And I wanted to know what magic they knew to change people's lives like that. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned, because it happened to me as a social worker, where little kids were watching me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that people are watching, little kids are watching, and if you do good things in the world, little kids are watching. You never know when one of those little kids is watching your podcast
Yeah,
and is saying like, "Yo quiero hacer eso. I want to do that. I want to do that kind of thing."
that's
So
beautiful.
that's my biggest lesson is that kids are watching and you
Mm,
better be good.
yeah, be an example for them, a good example. I love that. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, Maria, for being on the No Más Secrets podcast. I want to really deeply thank you for sharing your heart, for the important work that you do supporting survivors, especially in our community. And I don't know if you have any last questions, if you'd like to share your social media so they can follow your journey and know more about you.
Yeah, I'm the Chicana Gen Xer,
Mhm.
TikTok. So Chicana spelled with an X, so XINAXI.
I
I'm
will
also
write it
this.
on the description so they
I'm
can
al-
find you.
I'm also dyslexic,
Oh, you
so
are?
oh, like, I'm so sorry. But
It's okay.
the only social media that I use is TikTok. I do have old Facebook, but casi no lo uso. I do a lot of content on mental health. I also do a lot of political organizing and activism.
Oh, I
So
love
if you're interested,
that.
yes, I'm actually
Yeah.
headed to the No Kings March in my area in a little
Okay.
bit. But those are the kind of things that you'll see on that TikTok, just all about mental health and some very saucy political commentary on my part.
I will tag you in the description so they can follow you and follow your journey and all of your political content as well. Thank you again for sharing your story, your knowledge. Thank you so much for being here and holding space for conversations that most people are still afraid to have. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. That's how we break cycles. That's how we protect the next generation. If you're a survivor, I see you, I believe you, and your story matters. Make sure you follow No Más Secrets podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you feel called to share your story, my DMs are always open. Until next time, we don't keep secrets anymore.